It's getting more dangerous by the hour in Syria. So dangerous today that U.S. diplomats evacuated the country. The embassy is now closed, and Britain recalled its ambassador. This is the city of Homs, captured on cell phone video under bombardment by the government, the 40-year dictatorship of the Assad family. The uprising began in Syria 11 months ago. The UN estimates more than 5,000 people have been killed, many of them civilians. Why does Syria matter? Have a look at the neighborhood. What happens in Syria will have big implications for neighboring Israel and for the U.S. The government of Bashar al-Assad does not want the outside world to see what's happening inside Syria. Reporters are not welcome. But our Clarissa Ward managed to get in to introduce us to some of the rebels who are rising against the government.
Rebel forces here are preparing for the fight they know is coming their way.
Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar.
These men call themselves the Syrian Liberation Army, though they have no military training. They claim to be in control of large parts of this Syrian city, which has been a hotbed of unrest since the uprising began nearly a year ago. Abdul Rahman is one of the group's leaders.
My hand is move.
Is the goal of your group to protect the people in your area, or is the goal to take down the regime? Our goal is to protect the people and to bring down the regime, he said. We went on a tour of the area Rahman claims to have liberated from the Syrian government. And all the people here are with you? This area is all your area?
Yeah, my area. This one. This government cannot come.
Along this road, armed rebel fighters manned the checkpoints, not the Syrian army. But just a few minutes later, we were stopped. Regime forces had left a gruesome message by the side of the road.
So he's saying that this man was a political activist, that he was taken by the regime to a jail, shot in the head, and he's now been dumped by the highway.
At the local hospital, there is a constant flow of injuries and fatalities. Victims, people here say, of government snipers. But still they gather every night to shout their defiance and demand an end to the regime. And every night, gun battles erupt all around the city.
Men have just had word that the regime forces have surrounded some rebels. You can now hear on the loudspeaker they are calling people to come together and go and fight.
The Syrian Liberation Army set out to answer the call. With light weapons and heavy hearts, they stood guard on their street corners, brave defenders of their community, but no match for the Syrian army when it comes.
Scott, as you can see, the city behind me is now relatively calm, but we have been hearing sporadic bursts of gunfire, and it's important to remember that while some neighborhoods may be under rebel control, this entire city is still surrounded by government forces.
Clarissa, you suggested in your story that these forces that you're with are no match for the Syrian army, but tell me, what are they up against?
Well, I mean, you're dealing with a group of men who are armed with Kalashnikovs. They have some RPGs, very crudely made, homemade bombs. But the Syrian army, they have tanks, they have artillery. And the greatest fear for these men on the ground is that the Syrian army will begin to launch air assaults. And of course, it's impossible for them to match that sort of force in any way.
We're not talking about precisely where you are for the security of you and your team, but tell me, what is it like to be a resident of that town tonight?
I think there are two things that are most striking here. The first is that everybody lives in a constant state of fear here. The second is that the entire sort of concept of daily life is basically paralyzed. All the schools are closed. People aren't working anymore. The only thing that people live through now is this idea of the revolution. And there's still no sense here of when there might be some progress and life might start to go on as normal.
Are there any signs there tonight that the Syrian forces are going to move against the town where you are?
Scott, there's a town about 6 miles away where some of the hardest fighting has been going on, and there is certainly a very real fear on the ground that troops are going to push on into that town. And of course, after they pass that town, they're headed right for this city.
Clarissa Ward, thank you very much. This past Saturday, the United States and the Arab League supported a UN Security Council resolution that called on Assad to step down, but the resolution failed when Russia and China vetoed it.